Hey guys, I am the Comics Kid 2099 and I have a very bizarre video for you today. If you have never seen the movie The Boys from Brazil and you have any inkling that you might want to see that movie, go ahead and turn this video off right now because I am going to really spoil that movie hard in just a few seconds. Although this is not a review of The Boys of Brazil, as you can probably see from the title of this video. So those of you who are still here, probably you have no interest in seeing The Boys of Brazil, or you have already seen it. So I will go ahead and tell you what exactly the purpose of this video is, and that involves explaining a little bit of the plot from the movie The Boys of Brazil. So basically, this movie involves a Nazi hunter who is in his 60s or 70s. He's kind of old. The movie itself takes place in the 70s, and you've got an evil Nazi scientist. I don't remember his name right off the top of my head, but it's a real Nazi scientist who actually existed in the real world. And in the course of this movie, our Nazi hunter finds out that this evil scientist guy has somehow cloned Adolf Hitler. But unlike something like, say, Star Wars Attack of the Clones, where they are able to clone someone, and within the span of about 5 years, the clone is a fully grown adult, this cloning process takes much more time. They took the cloned material of Adolf Hitler, they put it into a whole bunch of women, made them pregnant, and then you've got like 90-something Adolf Hitler clone babies, and then they have to grow up at the same rate that every other human being has to grow up in. And this plan started sometime in the 1960s, so by the time the movie is taking place, most of these boys, they're about 12 years old. Now naturally, over the course of the movie, the Nazi hunter is able to stop this evil scheme, so none of the Adolf boys actually will grow up to become evil Adolf Hitlers or anything like that. Because according to this movie, the whole idea of nature versus nurture, it's a whole lot of nature and not so much nurture. So if the boys had a really nice, lovely existence growing up and they didn't have a mean, evil father and an overbearing mother, then in theory they would not grow up to become Adolf Hitler. The circumstances surrounding the real Adolf Hitler had to be present in the lives of all of the 93-something cloned Adolf Hitlers in order to produce someone who would act like the original Adolf Hitler. And so now you may begin to understand the purpose of this video. Today I want to talk about 5 people who, if I had the capacity, I would bring back in the fashion that they did in The Boys of Brazil. Now in theory this would mean that these people would have to grow up at the same rate that everyone else grows up, so I would be in my 60s or so by the time most of these people would be going into the fields that they are known for in real life. And this is just assuming that they all would go into the same fields that they are known for in real life. It's entirely possible that they wouldn't for whatever reason. And so, without a whole lot more ado, I will go ahead and tell you the top 5 people that I would Brazil. Number 1, Jack Kirby. If you read comic books, you probably know who Jack Kirby is. He co-created the Fantastic Four, Captain America. He created a whole bunch of other characters at DC Comics. I can't even name all of them. All of the characters from Jack Kirby's Fourth World stuff. He created the Demon, OMAC. He created Kamandi. He co-created the X-Men. He had a brief run on the Avengers. He had a hand in just about every famous comic book character that you can think of. And in fact, even today, we are still seeing his characters show up in movies and such as Darkseid, who showed up in the 10th season of Smallville, and he's still showing up in DC animated movies and stuff like that. And we probably will still continue to see his characters show up in different forms for the rest of all of our lives. Now, Jack Kirby, I think, is very interesting because he was a very ahead of his time kind of guy. He was doing stuff at the time that wouldn't be done again for another 10 or 15 years by other people. So I really think he is one of those people, if he was alive right now and was drawing comic books, he would be doing stuff way ahead of his time, and he would really be doing innovative stuff to make comic books much more interesting and unique than they are right now. Not to mention, I think we need more people in the comic book industry who are actually creators and are actually creating new characters. Far too often we have people who work in comics. They may produce really great stories, but there's not nearly enough creating done, in my humble opinion. They're just taking existing characters and doing neat stories with them maybe, but they're not really doing anything new or bringing anything interesting and different to the table. And that is something that Jack Kirby excelled at, and I think if we had him with us today, he would definitely be doing that. I wanted to try and do a few people on this list who are not necessarily connected to comic books. So this name and the next name both are actually completely not connected to comic books. So number 2 is someone who is actually still alive at this point, but he's very old. The last I checked, he's still doing music for movies and stuff, and that is John Williams. This man has done music for all of the Star Wars movies, and he is, in a sense, very instrumental in Star Wars being what it is today. While admittedly he didn't have anything to do with the story of the Star Wars movies, he definitely had something to do with the feel of Star Wars. Those Star Wars movies would not in any way be the same without his classic music, and I definitely think he had a huge hand in making those Star Wars movies be as memorable as what they are. And, in my humble opinion, his music is some of the only good stuff about the prequel trilogy. This guy is like in his 80s or 90s right now. I definitely wish that we could have him with us for another 60 or 70 years. I think that he is a very gifted and talented man, and his music needs to be with us for as long as we are all still here. So he is definitely one of the people that I would bring back in a Boys of Brazil kind of way. Number 3 is one who is very interesting. I was on the fence about whether I should do this guy or Stanley Kubrick, but ultimately Stanley Kubrick, while I think he was a very innovative filmmaker, I ultimately did not really care for the films of his that I watched. So I am going with Orson Welles. He is the creator of the movie Citizen Kane, widely considered to be one of the best movies of all time, possibly the greatest movie of all time. I myself have not seen it, but I have seen some of his other work in fiction. Not only was he a brilliant, very innovative filmmaker, he also had a fantastic voice, a very deep voice. I would bring back Orson Welles for the same reason that I would bring back Jack Kirby. I think that he was very much the kind of guy who was doing new and interesting stuff with film that no one else was doing, and decades later people are still saying that he was very ahead of his time. And if he was around now making movies with the technology that we had now, I firmly believe that he would be doing stuff that nobody else in film would be doing. Number 4 is a comic book artist who died a few years ago, Mike Wieringo. He was a fantastic artist, and he died kind of young, in his 40s I think. He did a very, very underappreciated run on the Fantastic Four in the early 2000s. His art style was very cartoony, and I am a huge fan of the cartoony kinds of style. I've said that before. I really loved his work. He did not get to do nearly enough stuff, in my opinion. A lot of his stuff is from the 90s, and that's an era of comic books that I am not nearly familiar with as I'd like to be, partly because a lot of the stories from the 1990s aren't really that great, but his art especially was phenomenal. And if I could have him around doing lots of comic books, I absolutely totally would. And the last name on my list is also connected to comic books. I figured since I am much more of a story guy than an art guy, and 2 of the names on this list are both comic book artists, I figured I would bring back one person who is strictly known as a writer. It took me a little while to figure out who I would bring back, and then I was looking on my bookshelf behind me, and I saw a book, and I instantly said, that's him. That's the guy that I would bring back as my number 5. This guy's name is Mark Gruenwald. He was working on comic books from the 80s to the mid-90s. I think he died in 97, something like that. This was another guy who died kinda young. He was not very old when he died. You may not be familiar with his work. He had a very long run on Captain America in the 80s. That's not what I've read. What I'm specifically thinking of that I absolutely adored was a 12-issue miniseries from the 1980s called Squadron Supreme. Mark Gruenwald, like everyone else on this list, was way ahead of his time. And the Squadron Supreme miniseries is where you can look to see proof of that. This thing was very much the end of all things kind of story. In a lot of ways, it's kind of sort of similar to The Watchmen, where you have superheroes who kind of go to war with each other. Although, at the end of the day, I think The Watchmen is more sophisticated than Squadron Supreme. Squadron Supreme is definitely much more enjoyable. And in a lot of ways, Gruenwald's ideas were kicking off stuff that wouldn't be done in comic books until years and years later. For example, the Marvel Civil War was very similar to Squadron Supreme, Although instead of being done in its own alternate universe, you have it being done in the actual Marvel Universe. And then Grunwald also had a hand in the new universe, specifically the Paranormal 7 series. And then after a couple of years in the new universe, there was a superhero draft in that world, and this was very similar to the aftermath of the Marvel Civil War, where superheroes were suddenly drafted and sent to superhero boot camp. Seriously, you could go all over the 2000s and find lots of ideas by creators, and then go back and look at Mark Grunwald's work from the 1980s, and it'd be like, oh, he was there first, here, 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 and here. He was a mastermind at coming up with really great ideas, just like everyone else on this list, and that is why he is number 5 on the people that I would bring back in the fashion of the boys from Brazil. So that is my top 5. There are certainly lots of other people that I would love to see more of their work if they hadn't died too soon or whatever. I would love to see what you guys think. Tell me in the comments below, who would you bring back? What do you think of my list? If you like this video, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I will be back tomorrow with an entirely different kind of video. So, until then, I'll see you guys later. Have a great day.